Welcome to Veranex Voices. This is a series of roundtable discussions that we're having with the many experts we have in-house. If you're not familiar with Veranex yet, we provide end-to-end services to help you develop solutions in the healthcare space. We have experts in design and engineering, in regulatory, preclinical, and clinical services, in data management, and commercial market access and strategy.
If that seems like an endless string of services, it's because it is. We're excited to bring all these capabilities under one roof to give our healthcare partners one company that does it all.
In this episode, we have two of those experts in a really good topic, which is human factors impact and information design and labeling and packaging, specifically about how integrating human factors earlier in the process can really help with the end result. I'd like to give a quick intro of who we all are. I'll start first. My name is David Copeland, and I'm a Director of Human-Centered Design with Veranex, and I am in the Minnesota office.
My name is Rae Davel, and I am a design researcher.
My name is Talitha Brenninkmeyer, and I'm a design researcher in Veranex London office. And I would like to introduce you today to our two guests. Here with us, we have Susan and Jimmy. And Susan, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and maybe some flavor on where you're active in the industry currently?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm Susan McDonald. I'm Director of Human Factors and User Research at Veranex. I've been with the company about 8 years, but I've been practicing human factors and product development for over 20 years. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Human Factors from Tufts University and a Master's of Science in Engineering Management from Northeastern University. I'm a member of the Human Factors and Ergonomic Society. I am also on the AMI Human Factors Committee, which is the committee responsible for the creation of HE75, for those who know that guidance. And there's a new guidance coming out this year, hopefully. That's the plan. And I'm also an editor of Human Factors in Healthcare Journal, which is fairly new. It came out, I think, a year or two ago. So I've been working on editing there, and it's been great. I can't tell. I love human factors. I love it in all aspects and happy to get involved in any way I can.
Thanks, Susan. Next to Susan McDonald here, we have Jimmy Wong with us today. Jimmy, could you tell us more about yourself as well, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jimmy. I'm Senior Visual Communications Designer here at Veranex, and I focus on developing instructions for use and labeling. Mainly my job is working really closely with the HF, the research team, and the regulatory team. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So as David shared, our topic today is human factors impact on information design. And there's a lot of ways that this manifests in our industry, but to start us off, can you two tell us a little bit about how you act as a bridge between design and the FDA?
Happy to do that. I'll jump in. So we help the team from design inception all the way through to design freeze. And all along the way, we're preparing for an FDA submission. So we're sort of burning down risk related to usability. But we do this by understanding the user upfront and really finding out their user needs and then socializing that with the design team and others on the team so that they are able to design things that meet their needs. And then we are constantly reassessing and iterating and working with the design team to update and improve those designs to meet user needs and make sure that the devices that we create are safe and effective. We make sure actual end users get to touch the actual end product long before we're trying to validate. So if there's no surprises, because as much as we bring to the team, we have a lot of experience in understanding our target end users and their capabilities and limitations. Every program has its nuance and is a slightly different application. And so there's always something to be learned by going back to the end user. So we make sure we do that. And then as the design progresses and as we get closer to design freeze, we are validating the device. We're making sure and actually really assessing the device to make sure there are no use errors related to critical tasks, which are tasks that if a user completes incorrectly or not completely, could cause harm or serious harm depending on the device that you are assessing. So we partner with the design team all throughout that process and make sure that we are ready for FDA submission and that users are able to use the device at that point. Jimmy, what did I miss?
No, I think you hit it there. I think a lot of it is knowing the expectations of the FDA, that validation portion. So knowing that early on so that when we start design and we start, refining the design, it's designing the right thing, the thing that is going to kind of make it through validation and be able to demonstrate to the FDA what they're looking for in areas that like it actually works. It works in the hands of the user, that it's safe to use, and people aren't going to make errors or hurt themselves. So yeah, I think knowing those expectations and how the design is going to be evaluated is crucial early on.
I agree, Jimmy. One thing I should touch on too is that the FDA does not want to see a usability validation where no users were ever brought in to try the device. So if you just think you're gonna, not study for the test and come in at the end and take this test, it's not going to go great. So for a number of reasons, you might learn things about usability that you can now is much more expensive to go back and fix, but also you are not showing that you've done your due diligence to make sure you're meeting the needs of the user. So they really want that full story. And I wholeheartedly agree with it. We should ethically be doing this all throughout the design process. And we're positioned here to do that. We have the teams to go back out and talk to users, and we have the depth and breadth of knowledge in the design space to react to what we learn.
Susan and Jimmy, I'm curious because you mentioned like on top of these FDA expectations, it's important to start user testing way earlier in the process. What are typical moments in the project that you recommend clients to do this and to implement this?
Sure. So I would start with the very beginning, going into the spaces that you expect your device to be used. If you have a device in mind, some clients aren't even sure what they want to innovate on just yet. So sometimes it's even before that, before we can have that initial ideation. So going into the spaces, interviewing users, but we also understand that clients have different constraints, and sometimes they're not able to invest in that early going into the actual space type of a engagement. And then we'll have, in that instance, we might have virtual interviews that we're able to conduct that are much more easily set up and easy to conduct and get quicker information. We're also able to tap into a lot of secondary research that we're aware of out there. And we also just have a team with many years experience that frequently will have already worked with the end users. So we also pool all of that knowledge.
Yeah, so I think it's also talking to clients and users early on. I think sometimes it's as simple as trying to solve problems that are already out there or still exist out there. But I think also part of that is, when we're coming up with new solutions, that we're also not introducing new problems. So I think both of those are, if we're looking at those, then we're also kind of living up to the expectations that FDA is hoping that you're thinking about.
Really good point, Jimmy. And then I was thinking the next, I think, great touch point with the end user might be a concept feedback session where the concepts aren't fully baked, but we're sort of kind of looking for directionality. Is this an ambulatory device that we're expecting people to carry maybe in their pocket or in a purse or in their car? And what forms might resonate with those end users at that moment? And so in that case, the design team would create stimulus that is really 2D, but maybe won't show all the features of the device just yet. And then we were able to come back and give them the information that we learned from the end users that might work for them. And then the designers can kind of have that directionality. That's there, David and Jimmy, as designers. I'd like to hear your side of it too.
Well, I want to poke at that just a little bit because I think we're brushing up to a little bit of also what could be perceived as being preference in some ways too, right? And I'm wondering a bit about, I'm going to expand that a little bit to think about the value where we're talking about FDA requirements and regulation and thinking about things you have to accomplish to, sort of muster on things, but also what value does that have to the company looking at creating a product that is desirable, and does that have benefit with the process we're going through? Does that enhance that, and can that help with the eventual sort of adoption of a product as well?
Such a good point, David. I think that this is the opportunity that when we're given that forward the opportunity early in the process, those are the times that you can make those decisions to delight your end user without a lot of investment. When you understand, like, oh, if I had a device, if it only could have its own storage pouch, or if it only could fit in my car cup holder, and then the designers are, they're like, piece of cake, I can do that for you. But when it's later in the process, wow, that becomes a real challenge.
Fantastic. Again, kind of going down this pathway of thinking about FDA guidance and requirements. I'd like to know a little bit more about what you both have sort of learned and experienced, but where is there room to flex within this? Because if we're looking at requirements and sort of guidances that we have to achieve and have to kind of work within, what space is there to be, for lack of a better term, creative
So I think designers can come up with a lot of exciting ideas and solutions, or see, look at problems in different ways. But I think it's also important that we collaborate with human factors to be able to kind of like keep the user in mind, and also understand about, yeah, what are the challenges that might exist for the user, or hardships that might exist for the users. And then that kind of gets us into the next step of being able to think about how the future studies will go, whether it's formative or validation studies. But being in that mindset, then I think it's, the solutions that we come up with are also not only exciting, but can kind of survive or make it through these tests successfully. And then I think also ultimately after that, it's once you make it through those tests successfully, it's really being able to demonstrate to the FDA that not only are these solutions that users want, but that they also work for the user, are in the hands of the user, and also safe to use. So I think, there's plenty of room to collaborate and show off, design in that space.
Completely, Jimmy. I would just say that FDA is not prescriptive when it comes to design. They're never going to say this should have a button or this should have a latch or something. They will say, does the button have the amount of force that people are able to impart? Do people understand when they press the button that it has been pressed fully and correctly, or whatever feature, insert feature here. So I feel like that gives a huge amount of leeway on the design side. And I can say from human factors perspective, when we go and assess things with the users and we come back with findings for designers, we are also trying not to be prescriptive. I want to give them, as professionals and really talented professionals, as much freedom as possible to solve the problem. So if the problem is the user doesn't understand that the system is on, I will say, consider informing the user more clearly about device status. And then designers can go and decide, is that going to be a visual feedback moment, an audible feedback moment? Is it something on a UI? Is it something physical? It could be a tactile moment. So I just really hope, and I definitely want to hear from David and Jimmy, so how you feel, how that process goes when we hand it back to you, what we learn.
Well, if I can add one thought really quick, or one sort of question with that too. You talked about giving or providing guidance to design, and then at some point sort of evaluating how well something is performed. I'd be intrigued to kind of poke at that a little bit further, understanding where you see human factors in the process with design, and then how does that engagement work? Because I think we can look at it a couple different ways, and I don't think all arrangements are the same. But I'd like to understand a little bit about how you see your engagement with design working, and where are you inserted?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the things that we bring as human factors engineers is beyond the person who assesses designs with the user. I mean, we do that, sure, but we also are the user advocate throughout the process. So we can sit in concept gen sessions. Some of us are more talented than others. I can say I'm not super talented in my ability to maybe draw my ideas, but thankfully I have others in the room who can, and I can describe what I'm thinking of. So we're kind of all part of the process. And then I think as the design team is sifting through and using a number of parameters to assess whether something should be pursued or not, and I know there's a number of things there, such as, is it manufacturable? Is it going to be complex or expensive? And almost always in there is it going to be easier to use, or is it ergonomic? And those are the moments that I think we can provide value and say, well, we can actually tell you if that's ergonomic or not and why, and tell you if it's easy to use and why.
Yeah, I think when you guys are able to tell us parameters like that help guide, like, oh, hey, this is too high, it needs to be lower. This is too far, it needs to be closer. This is too small, it needs to be bigger, but also kind of giving us some of those contexts. And I think even on, things that are kind of less straightforward as parameters like that could be, hey, like the users, they actually, they're interacting with 3 or 4 other devices during this time. They have really high cognitive load. So how can you simplify your product and your user experience? Like, it's not going to be the only thing they're focused on. So how can we reduce that for them and make it simpler? They don't really have the time or the space to learn your product in that moment. Or maybe it's, other users that are like, hey, they don't experience medical scenarios on a regular basis. So they might be really anxious or nervous. So how do we create a product that, can meet them at their level and could, put them at calm and not be afraid of what they're about to walk into. So I think, some of those things that you guys spend so much time in the field and with, observing users and talking to users and bringing back those insights, I think it's really helpful in guiding us to make the right solution, the right product for the user.
I really love that, Jimmy. I feel like those are the user needs that are really difficult when you're trying to say, validate them or confirm that they've been met, but things like feeling confident in the use of a product or feeling unintimidated. And I really love those collaborations because I think the HF team can describe might help you build confidence or what might help you be less intimidated. But then the design team really has to put that into action and then use that as a parameter for comparing different concepts. And I do think it's a neat moment of like a really soft handoff and kind of back and forth of, seeing where you take it. And then we kind of bring it back and see how whether it hit the mark.
And I think when we're able to understand those and, develop solutions for them, I think it really helps us set the user up for success. And I think that's kind of how we achieve, the results we want, like how we actually get validation is helping the user just, become confident and, be able to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing.
Good point. I think another one of those great requirements is user discretion. A lot of folks, lay users, don't want their medical device to alert the world that they have a health condition. And so, designing something so that is discreet, how do you prove that you've done that? It's really hard to prove, but I think as long as we have that in mind along the way, we can find really unique and interesting ways to make that happen.
While you're talking about things that you're keeping in mind for your users, can you speak a little bit more to when you're considering like the environment and the context of use for that?
Yeah, good question. That really does go hand in hand. Like we do need to understand the user, but once you put the user in an environment, there's a whole other layer then that can impact design and vice versa. So for example, if you're designing something in a surgical space that's using radiation, you need to understand your user is going to be wearing a lead vest and likely eye protection and or gloves. But also lighting could be different. Maybe the room is dim. Maybe there's a loud hum from an MRI machine. So if you're providing audible feedback, you need to take that into account. And also visual feedback in different lighting conditions. Frequently we will define the use environment in a way that's probably really challenging for the designers, but I know they tackle these challenges really well. But things like being able to use an ambulatory pump in the middle of the night, in the dark, but also in the bright sunshine as you're walking into school. I'm lucky in that I get to define those parameters and then I can hand it off to the design team and say, okay, you need to make this work in all of these conditions.
Yeah, I think you also kind of touched on it a little bit before too, sometimes being discreet, like, not just creating devices that just work, but kind of, work to the needs or the expectations of the user, breast pump, can they do that, discreetly at home, but can they also do that discreetly in the public where there are other people around? I think it's, the contexts aren't always just kind of like one moment. I think it's a lot of moments. If we're thinking in the hospital setting, sometimes equipment, they're not just in the OR, they move between spaces. They go through hallways, elevators, up and down, ramps. So I think it's being mindful of those spaces they're going through and all the different users who might come across and interact with them. In the OR, it could be the surgeon or the nurse. But when it's being set up or moving through the building, it could be the tech or the people working on maintenance, or even, the manufacturers, the shippers, all the people across the use spectrum.
Reaching there's a whole ecosystem of users, of end users that you should be considering, the purchasers, all the way from that person to maybe the shipping department and all the way to the end user, the primary user.
And you're talking about these parameters that you set to basically work together as a team and give each other the room to be creative as well within those parameters, to be able to match the framework that the FDA sets and the high expectations it has with it. Susan, can you tell us a bit more? Are there other places where you can see creativity and possibilities to be creative within the FDA guidance? And for instance, how you can in other ways impact the standards that we all follow when working to be cleared by the FDA?
Sure. So I'm thinking of in terms of FDA guidance and enabling creativity. I mean, I being on the AMI Human Factors Committee has allowed me to impact that guidance and to step in where I feel like I can provide value and help the next set of HF engineers and designers and to understand what they need to do to meet users' capabilities and limitations. So I'm able to impact in that manner, and also kind of to be in going to human factors conferences where, we share with our professional peers state of the art and how we work with end users. And I do think it's constantly evolving. Things like recruiting the right end user. I think we've all kind of evolved in the sense that we've gone through COVID and end user testing was more challenging. So shipping prototypes to users and then having an unboxing experience using a webcam was a very different experience, but something that I think we should carry forward in our testing because it enabled us to get to users who maybe aren't able to drive to a recruiting facility and or aren't healthy enough to be in the room with other people. And it allows us to reach a broader audience. And that's really, we should be meeting the needs of all, not just those folks that are able to come in for testing and volunteer for that. Yeah, Demi, jump in, please.
Yeah, I think other ways can also be, when regulatory bodies or the FDA, when they have, when they do panels or presentations, I think, attending them, I think it helps see what their current thinking is or where it might be going. But also when they're writing new guidances, there are comment periods. So I think, reading up on what their draft guidance is and then participating in those comment periods and, giving feedback or things that they might not have thought of while they were writing that guidance. And then hopefully it makes it into their final guidance. But also kind of what Susan said earlier, I think there's also a little bit of us in the industry paying attention to where trends or how societies are changing, because that could be the next thing that regulatory bodies or whatever that they try to keep up with themselves and see where things are evolving. So there are ways that design could, I think we think of regulatory bodies as they set the standards and we just follow them, but I think there are ways that both of us are actually just kind of navigating and evolving together, paying attention to what's going on or what needs to be addressed as it comes down to us in the future.
Yeah, I agree, Jimmy. Thanks for bringing that up. I think there is more of a back and forth than people realize in that we're given the opportunity to comment on new guidance and review new guidance. So that's certainly something we've been a part of, and I appreciate it. We bring together more than just myself or Jimmy. It's the whole broader team is able to comment, and we, as HE75 was getting updated, we held a number of meetings for folks that had, regulatory background and human factors background to weigh in on what they're seeing in the guidance. So that was great. We're also able to help, I think, in creating best practices. And currently we're working with a government agency to create best practices for a home use device with a unique population. And that guidance is getting socialized and out there. And I think the more that we give the light of day to those types of recommendations, I guess, for lack of a better word, the more that we can impact design as a whole and make things usable for all. We're really working towards a more inclusive design for all and a more universal design. It's really where we'd like to go. So we do what we can to raise the bar for everybody.
Expanding a little bit, I think Jimmy touched on other regulated bodies or regulatory bodies here. We've been talking a little bit more about the FDA, but if we expand a little bit, how do you think about regulatory pathways in other markets and going to what you talked about before, offering guidance too. So thinking about outside of the FDA, what's your experience and sort of what's your perspective with those other regulatory bodies?
Sure. Yeah. Human factors is not just a US based thing, as we all know. There's, guidances in Europe that we follow. In England, there's a draft guidance in China currently. And so I think it's only going to become more and more prevalent that different locales and geographies are going to be accepting human factors as something that is a good practice in design and in medical devices specifically. So I think just staying on top of all those guidances is helpful. I know that the folks that create those refer to others. And so they understand, they stand on the shoulders of what's been done and they work with what's there. So they frequently harmonize pretty well with each other. But yeah, being aware of those guidances is important. And just, I really think there's only going to be more. So we're going to have to, continue to do that, maybe do some more worldwide travel and share but I know we make a real effort to go to the Human Factors in Healthcare Symposium in the US, and there are other folks that attend that as well. And there's a lot of knowledge share around 62366 guidance in Europe, as well as other guidances. So envision more working sessions, more working groups with folks that are creating guidances, and happy to be part of those as I'm invited.
Yeah, I think being aware that there are guidance, other places have guidances, and familiarizing yourself with them when you're getting into those places. But I think another thing that all of us could do that kind of gives you a chance to be successful in those other geographical locations is just being sensitive to what's particular in those areas. So I think Eastern cultures aren't the same as Western cultures. I think in Asia, actually even in Europe, I think there are plenty of places where visually, graphically, I think they are more developed and it's more part of their daily life than in the US. I think of Japan. I think, they appreciate a lot of their packaging, a lot of their instructions and visuals are cartoonized, and people have a relationship with those materials and those documents. And I think in Europe, I think you look at places like Denmark, where graphic design is almost everywhere you go in your daily walk of life. They just have such a higher appreciation for design. So I think they expect a lot more of their products when they're put in front of them. So when something isn't as nice, I think in both of those places, whether it's in Denmark or Japan or certain places of Europe, I think they expect more of their product. So poor product, they're less likely to engage with it, and a better product, oftentimes not only are they going to engage with it, but they'll get excited and they'll want to learn about it and use it right. So I think knowing how we could meet the user and satisfy the user, I think that goes very much hand in hand with a lot of the regulations, because both of those, it's really user first. Those regulations are trying to help us get closer to designing the right thing for the user.
I agree, Jimmy. We've conducted a lot of research long before certain places had regulations. So we've been to Asia, been to Europe, been to South America and North America. So, meeting the needs of those users, we've already been trying to meet the needs of those users, I should say. So I think there'll just be a continuation of that. But I think going back to our discussion about having sort of freedom within regulations, I think, there's still freedom there. But I think the designers will have to really, when we're focused on a locale, we'll have to think through what are the mental models for that geography, what are, the expectations for the users, and what are maybe predicates there will always be challenges for each geography.
Thanks. So we've heard you talking about different geographies, about how human factors and designers can play together to really create the best information design possible for their users. If you would want the audience to remember one thing from today's conversation, what would that be, Susan?
Okay, good question. Something I've said for years is, as an end user myself, is just, I wish someone had just tried this once. So at a very base level, whenever you design something or creating something, use it once. Have other people use it. And don't feel like there aren't options in the journey of the product development. There are always options and risks based on your choices. So, maybe your program can have really robust early user research, but maybe it can't. And if it can't, we, know that human factors engineers and designers can meet you where you're at. We're happy to work with the constraints that we're given. And I think any form we can provide value.
And I think design and HF is both at the start and at the end of the development process. It's all about thinking about the user. That's what, if you think about them at the start, it's also the FDA is thinking about them at the end. So really, I think design and HF were part of that conversation. We're in there, and we should be there at the start and at the end.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Roundtable series from Veranex. Our expertise is our people, and we are excited to share their experience and guidance with our people that they can provide to you and our other healthcare partners. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the conversation.